What is up, guys? Today, Isaiah and I are going to be talking about Titan. We're going to be talking about collagen. We're going to be talking about crimping and uncrimping and how our muscles and tendons actually store and release energy in the physiology. And the reason why is because physiology is really important in understanding how you can change training to maximize adaptation. Now, this concept was introduced to me by Ben Moxness. Shout out, Ben. Ben's currently in PT school. He doesn't have a life. All he does is study all the time, like 24/7. He just reads research papers. So this is much of the stuff he and I talked about for like 3 hours yesterday. And some of the like sticking points that we had when we were talking about it, some of this stuff is more again, physiology or basic science, but it's still really relevant. And I think it's super interesting. So if you guys don't like science or physiology or the underlying reason why we do certain things, then maybe this won't be that interesting to you, but I would encourage you to stick around and try to follow along. I'll have some diagrams that I'll explain, but we did try this a second ago and I had to redo it because I accidentally shared like my personal information when I was sharing my screen. So we're going to try not to do that again. But anyways, tendons, I learned yesterday, they have like a hierarchy, which is not necessarily novel. Like you guys probably, a lot of people probably understand that intuitively. It's similar to a muscle, right? Because muscles have what is essentially it would be like a fascicle, and then you get down to a muscle fiber, and then inside the muscle fiber is like myosin, actin. They
Like the
bind.
Russian dolls.
Yeah. What are those called? Like
I think Russian dolls.
is
Like
that
the
literally it? I feel
where
like
you
there's
open.
got to be an actual name. But yeah, so tendons have a similar thing. I'm gonna pull up this.
Oh, Matryoshka doll.
Yes, a matryoshka doll. Thank God you looked that up.
Also
Anyways, so
called a nesting doll or a
nesting
stacking
doll.
doll.
That's what I was thinking of. Did you use ChatGPT for that? You're not that
No,
smart, bro.
I use Google, man.
Good old Google.
Yeah.
All right, so hopefully I do this correctly this go around. But let's go window. Ooh, window. I did it. I'm so smart. Okay, so this is what the tendon looks like, right? You have the whole tendon here. Then it's broken down into fascicles, and then there's between fascicles, there's a little bit of space. There is a matrix in there, IFM, intrafascicular matrix. And then inside of that, you have a fiber, then a fibril, and then you have crimping, uncrimping happening there. And then you have kind of the building blocks of collagen, tropocollagen, et cetera. It goes even smaller. So that is how the tendon is made up. And what I learned yesterday is that tendons have a crimping and uncrimping that happens, which I knew that, but inside of that there is energy that is stored and released. And when you crimp and uncrimp,
Define crimping and uncrimping.
crimping and uncrimping, man, that's a very difficult question that I don't know if I could accurately do, but basically it's where I think there's a bond that breaks in the collagen fiber or fibril, and then the tendon lengthens as a result. So crimping is like a scrunchy fry, and then it goes to like a straight French fry. And when that happens, it happens because certain bonds are broken, and that takes time and a certain amount of energy, and you have to load it a certain way for it to occur. And that's also what I believe is what loads the tenocytes, which allows for actual tendon adaptation. Again, this is to my understanding based off the very long, extensive conversation I had yesterday. So I'm still wrapping my head around this, but I figured I would share it with you guys because it's super interesting. So when that happens, there is what's called a toe region. The toe region is where you don't necessarily have like the fascicles sliding past each other, because that's what happens when you store and release a lot of energy. Like I showed you in the diagram previously, the fascicles are like these kind of big chunks of collagen fibers, and they have a gel separating them. So like, let's say in your patella, there's 5 fascicles. Those slide past each other, and that's what allows you to lengthen the tendon and store and release a lot of energy. And that is demonstrated by what's called a stress strain curve. So a stress strain curve is strain, the percent of deformation, and then stress, which is how much force it took to deform that.
Do you have a picture of the stress strain curve?
Do I ever, Isaiah Rivera? I set this all up to make sure I didn't screw this up again. All right, so this is a stress strain curve, right? So here you have stress on the y-axis, and then on the x-axis you have strain, which is a percentage. You could just look this up. This is technically true of any material, right? If you apply a force to an object it will deform unless it's perfectly elastic. But this is kind of demonstrating that, right? And in the toe region, this is where the crimped fibers are, right? This is where, and Ben sent me this, which is really, really helpful. So there's a percentage of strain. The Achilles, I think, has like max, what Ben said was 12%, and the patella is like 20%. So it's actually more stretchy relative to its total size. But because the absolute distance is more when you stretch the Achilles, because it's a longer tendon. So like if you stretch it, if it's a, for the sake of the example, if it's a 100-foot tendon and it stretches 10%, that would be 10 feet, right? But if you have a 1-foot tendon and it stretches 20%, it's only going to stretch whatever, 0.2, like a couple inches. Like,
Yeah.
so that's in terms of absolutes, the Achilles will stretch more, but in terms of the relative percentage stretches or deforms, the patella is technically like stretchier. And yeah, so here we have the crimp fibers. You can see that there's this toe region. That is where the fibers are uncrimping, right? So they're going from this crimped fiber position to uncrimped, which you can see here. That's the fiber being straightened. And then you have microscopic failure, and then macroscopic failure. Macroscopic failure would be like the tendon actually ripping. Microscopic failure, this is probably where you're having those fibers actually tear and you do damage to them, which I don't necessarily know if is 100% like descriptive of what happens, because technically it's kind of hard to measure that. I mean, I guess maybe with ultrasound you could, but from what I've seen with Jill Cook and Ebony Rio, it's like this kind of color graded. Isaiah, you've probably seen it before, where it shows like cellularity and like dysfunctional tendon and functional tendon.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, anyways, in this section that is like between 2 and let's say 6% of strain percentage, this is where we really see a lot of energy being returned relative to the deformation, right? So if you stretch it, 2% more in this range, you get a lot more energy than the first 2%, right? The area under the curve is pretty significant, meaning you're getting a lot of energy relative to the amount that you've stretched it. Or maybe not, the area under the curve is probably not an accurate depiction. Maybe, yeah, because you're getting more total energy. But you can see the slope steeper. That's what's more important. And so as a result, my question was, well, why does that happen? And Ben explained to me that when you're uncrimping the fiber, you're not really getting a lot of energy. You're not getting a lot of return relative to the deformation. So when you get into that, what's called the elastic region, which was that second region, you get a lot of energy for the amount that it deforms. And so my question was, okay, Ben, if you're telling me that the tendon deforms when you apply a load to it, right? Because it's soft. Like if you poke your patella or your Achilles, like technically it's soft, right? The tendon is not stiff. You put a force through it, you feel it stiffen. And then I was like, at what point does the tendon start stretching and start deforming? And he was like, technically it is the whole time. And I was like, okay, then how come Isaiah can jump way higher off vert than Stephen Holmes can? And we got in this very entrenched conversation of why that happens, and both kind of like problem solve through it because it was a good question. Basically what happens is the tendon, that toe region, is a lot longer in someone who has very, very, very stiff tendons, right? Like it takes a lot of energy to get it to uncrimp, because again, you don't get a lot of return in that uncrimping phase. You guys looked at the slope, like there's
It's
not a lot
like
of return.
it's like, to give an analogy that's exaggerated, imagine like a freaking steel pole that's bent, like that's all scrunched up together, and you're trying to stretch that, versus if you had like a freaking thread from a piece of your clothes that's all scrunched up together. It's easier to straighten that than to straighten the steel bar.
Yeah, I kind of think of it too like a rubber band. Like technically, you probably get deformation on those big rubber bands that you see from Rogue, like those monster bands,
Yeah,
right? If you had like a monster band that was, what are they, like 90 pounds of force or something like that?
yeah,
Like what that means is it doesn't deform until 90 pounds. Like
yeah,
it doesn't start stretching, becoming really noticeably strained or deforming until at
yeah.
least 90 pounds.
But it's getting past the toe region. So you have the it's like crimped, and then as soon
Exactly.
as you get it straight, that's when like you basically
You
get
actually start to stretch.
more energy stored per millimeter of stretch, essentially.
Exactly.
But when
Yep.
you're crimped, it's not very effective, like the stretch. Like you're not
There's
storing
not
that
enough
much
like
energy.
deformation. There's not enough deformation to return much energy. It's just
Yeah,
not because they're related, right? Like they're not one to one, but like the reason you
yeah,
get stress is because of the deformation. So if there's no deformation, there's no
yeah.
stress.
And
And
this has I think two implications too, because when it comes to tendons, there's like wow.
whoa, the
Oh,
balloons. I don't know why yours does that because it's a
yeah.
legitimate camera. Like,
That's true.
it's not like your
The
iPhone.
AI is taking over
Yeah,
everything.
it's crazy.
But there's basically like there's performance implications and tendon rehab implications. Can you explain in terms of tendon rehab why crimping and uncrimping is important as well? Like that. Like remember what you were telling me earlier about that's why strength work is
Oh yeah.
important.
So what happens when you do a plyo? Because I was talking to Ben, and I think he got some of this from another another person, but I don't remember who it was. But pretty much what happens is when you do a plyo, the collagen fibers, the collagen fascicles, those big units that we looked at, they slide past each other really, really quickly. And that's how it stretches, right? It's really effective at storing and releasing energy. It's almost like if you ever put water in cornstarch and you try to punch it, it's like really stiff. The same way, when you stretch a tendon really fast, the tendon doesn't necessarily uncrimp as much as it would in a slow strength or a strength exercise. Like the time it takes for those bonds to break and uncrimp is longer than what you would see in a plyometric. Like a plyometric is so fast and so elastic and so stiff. And the more force you put through the tendon, the stiffer it acts, right? The more you get that kind of stress strain happening, but it's like with really high energy, you're not actually seeing much uncrimping in the actual collagen fibers, which is why when you do strength work, specifically isos, where time is an important component or tension under time is a really important component, you are able to see uncrimping happen. And that is where the signaling for tendon adaptation is in that uncrimping. And that's why strength work is so valuable, is if you're only doing plyos, you're not really addressing the actual collagen fibers or fibrils, you're really only addressing the fascicles sliding past each other, which is effective for performance, but that's not necessarily, and maybe the muscles and reflexes and everything else, but it's not necessarily effective if you want to have a stiffer tendon, right? You could have a stiffer joint, meaning you're looking at the muscle, the tendon, the bone, the transmission of those forces being really effective, but that's made up of a bunch of different pieces. Now, when you're breaking it down, like we have the muscle, we have the bone, we have the tendon, you want those individual units to function better, then strength work is going to allow you for better adaptation. That's why we see like, sometimes strength athletes have crazy stiff tendons. They can't use them at all
Yeah.
because they're like too stiff and they don't have the rate of force development to use them. But strength work is really effective at changing the stiffness and cross-sectional area of the actual collagen fibrils. So this is a little bit, again, debatable because Jill Cook will say, like, we've looked at all the imaging and there's not that much of a difference. We see function change, but the images don't really change. And this is where maybe there's a little bit of like it's a little bit convoluted and we don't really know for sure because that's a counter argument for it. But it does seem like it's logical to me, right? This like makes sense. So this was like a big conversation that we had, and I was like, okay, that's a big takeaway point.
And
Is strength work is going to uncrimp it, and that's going to allow for adaptation.
it's also why the guideline of you should be at 70% or higher of your maximum voluntary contraction, and then why you should be at least 30 seconds on an isometric hold. Because I don't
Yeah,
remember the exact
and slow,
percentage, but it's like at 30 seconds, you get most of the uncrimping, and then it's just like marginal gains after that. Like basically after 40, I think it's like after a minute, like it would take like 2 more minutes of holding it to get like 5% more
right?
uncrimping or something like that.
Yeah, it's like very non-significant.
Yeah. So
You probably have
Austin,
most
that's
of
why
the
you need to go
adaptation.
heavy. And that's why you should do your ISOs.
Austin's catching strays. He's not even here. So yeah. So as a
Oh, one more thing. One more thing.
yes,
This is more of a question for you. So I think I kind of know the answer too, but for the viewers,
I'll do it for the views, bro.
So to store more energy, right? You need the fascicles to be sliding past each other, and they need to be
Yeah.
uncrimped.
Well, they don't have to be uncrimped to store more energy necessarily, because that
Okay,
takes
okay.
time. They
Yeah.
actually won't probably uncrimp, and if it's fast enough, they
Well,
probably won't uncrimp, is what I gathered. I don't know if that's necessarily
yeah.
accurate, but that's what I gathered
So
from Ben.
if you have a tendon that is, for lack of a better word, like really messed up, right? It's a lot of the fibers are in disarray, and it looks like that instead of like that.
Shredded crab meat.
Yeah, and you can't really fix a degenerated tendon. Like it's a degenerated tendon stays degenerated. Is essentially what's happening when you're doing your rehab and all that stuff. Is you're creating more collagen that is healthy, that is more effective at sliding past each other.
Correct. Yeah, like you're probably creating technically when you become degenerative and it becomes frayed, like you're describing, which I don't even know if that's what it looks like, but let's say for the sake of this illustration,
Yeah,
that is what it looks like. Then you're having hypercellularity. We see, so that means there's a bunch of cells. Let's assume
yeah.
tenocytes in the tendon between the fascicles, whatever, in the fibrils, whatever. You get all these cells that are produced, and they secrete more collagen matrix. And it's not necessarily dense regular tissue; it's dense irregular tissue, which means it's not straight, right? Like you
Yeah,
said, it's kind of all over the place. That is still way stronger. What was produced, even if and then there's the torn portion. The torn portion is not doing shit, right? It can't absorb
yeah.
or store or do anything with force. It can't transmit force. But all of this other tendon that you produced, if you were to add up the total volume of like usable collagen and directionally, whatever you could somehow model it, you would get higher capacity
So it's
in
like
that scenario.
it's an abomination, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. The tendon
It
becomes an
looks
abomination.
ugly, but it's
Yeah.
like literally like
Yeah, dude.
Abomination in Marvel.
It is. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he's just like messed up and stuff, but he's huge
Yeah, he's a
and
beast,
powerful.
absolute fucking unit.
Yeah,
Same yeah, that is an amazing
that's what
illustration
that's
analogy.
what this bad boy right here
Yeah,
is.
that's what that giant knob is on your kneecap. It's an abomination, but it is effective. And
Yeah,
that's what we see too is that like distorted, fucked up tendons are really generally better. Like athletes are
yeah,
better when that's the case. They jump higher. And
and it's why it's important to address the symptoms and function and just decrease pain, right? Because a lot of times it's like
yeah.
the actual sensation of pain is what's preventing you to load your tendon.
Yeah, like you're gonna have like a mechanoreceptors or sensory neurons in that area, and then they receive some input that says this is too much and this hurts a lot, and I don't want to do this anymore. And then your force output drops. That's what we see happen in tendons. Is like the thing that is driving your force output is being limited by your sensory neurons. So
Yeah,
when you're feeling pain, you're not going to push hard. Like
yeah.
just intuitively, it's not going to happen.
What's
So
crazy? Can you pull up that strain curve?
which one? The one I showed earlier?
Yeah, yeah. When you look at this, what's wild? We've talked about this before, but you basically have to get as close to injury as possible for max performance. If you look at if you look at the stress strain curve, look where it shows the tendon snapping essentially. Essentially.
Oh yeah, at the top peak forces, like over here.
Exactly. And
Macroscopic failure
guess what we're doing when
is
we jump? We're trying to
we're
exert as much
trying to get
force
as
as
close
possible.
as we can to that. We're getting as much strain as possible.
Yeah.
We want to see if we can get there.
And it's why I forgot what coach it was that mentioned this. Uh, but there was I don't know if he was a track coach or not, but he was basically like, when you're at your max performance, you should. I don't even know if this was you that told me, or if I just came across it. But when you're basically PRing everything, your performance is at its highest, whether it's sprinting, jumping, that's when you should be the most careful, and you should actually like back off a little bit
That was
to
probably
stay.
me, yeah. This is I think Mike has told me this too, but I've reiterated it. Like cars don't break down when they're going 20 miles an hour. I mean, some mechanics would probably say, like, yeah, dude, your car always breaks down going through the parking lot, not when you're on the highway. And I'm like, I don't know about that. But yeah, when you're at really high speeds, like race cars have the worst accidents when they're going 200 miles an hour around a bend,
Yeah.
right? When you're
That's
pushing the
why.
absolute boundary of what you're trying to do, the forces are way higher. The outputs are
Yeah.
way higher. The energy, like storage and release, is way higher. Everything is pushing the brink of that material's capacity. So if you're Isaiah and you want to jump 50.5 inches or 51 or 52, you are getting to the material's capabilities very end limits, the end range
It's
for
kind of
that
terrifying.
individual. Yeah. I mean, that's why you tore your IT band.
Yeah. That's why I'm doing drops this weekend.
Proud of you. Proud of you.
Yeah.
Good
So
job.
right now I'm pushing, everything is up, weight numbers are up, all that stuff, and I can tell my body, I'm not hurt, but I can tell I'm pushing the limits. So I'm like, let me do drops so I can survive my deload when inevitably the forces are gonna be way higher.
Dude, that's the thing too. Like unloaded is always when you got hurt in Utah, unloaded. Max performance, right? Everything
Yeah.
was dialed in, caffeine, whatever else.
I'm actually
But
considering, I wanna test my power clean, but in terms of, like, squatting and testing all that, just slow strength and just guarantee, because right now, like,
you're
I did
saying during
the,
deload weeks?
yeah, yeah, or this particular deload week, because I can tell I could probably, I could probably half squat 525, but it's like, I don't really
You
care to
want to
find
do
out if,
that, but
like
you know what you could do is put a belt squat on.
that actually is perfect. We could test what my max is on that.
Yeah, we can see, and we'll see if it's accurate. Like, if it's not 500, there's no way it's accurate. I'm
So
kidding.
So to cap it off, by the way, this episode off, what is the actionable information from what you learned with the conversation with them?
Well,
Like,
I
did
think
it
you summed it
change
up.
your perspective on
Not
how
per
you would
se, like, in terms
program
of
or
training, I wouldn't say there was anything that was it made more sense of things I've previously said. It kind of confirmed what I've always thought, right? So, 1, strength work seems to be a lot better. I wouldn't okay, actionable things. I don't think that low-level plyos are going to I don't think any plyo is realistically going to have the best adaptation for the tendon because you're not gonna get that uncrimping to happen. So if there is a response happening as a result of that with Keith Barr's scene, that's not gonna happen by doing, a hopping warm up to get the tendon to warm up or doing like long ground contact time plyos. Like I think those are just too intense. The force is too high, and there's not that much on crimping. I think strength work is going to be your best bet for helping tendons to potentially change the amount of cross sectional area of the tendon, and then
and you're
also
talking about, like, making a healthy tendon?
yeah, like getting a healthy tendon.
Yeah.
And then 2, I think that when it comes to
So the jump
performance,
rope shit,
no, I
it's
don't agree
kind
with
of
that. Yeah,
bullshit.
I don't agree with that. Yeah, I don't agree with that at all. Well,
By
I
the
think the
way, if you
logic
don't know what the
behind
jump
it
rope thing is, it's essentially using jump rope like ISOs, where you do it every
in like a
6 hours
5-minute warm up, yeah.
and load
But
the
the
tendon.
problem is and the logic is that you get a special signaling that happens in a specific type of collagen that comes in to repair the area, and that you meet the time demands. But in my experience, that just is not what happens. Like guys just get
Yeah.
hurt. It just makes the neurons upregulate. I think they're afferent neuron. I don't remember, but they get really sensitive and you get pain. Like that's the big takeaway. And then, yeah, so ISOs, I still stand by those. I think that they meet a lot of the demands, for time and intensity. Slow strength, keep doing that if you have unhealthy tendons. Understand that you have an abomination as a tendon when you're a jumping athlete, and you have to manage that. Your goal is to get your function so high and your pain level so low that you don't feel it when you are going around a bend at 200 miles an hour if you're Isaiah. And then also I would say that the the changes that you see in like rate of force development and stuff is not just the tendon, it's not just the muscle, it's not just the bone. It's an intimate relationship between all of those things. So you want a tendon that can have a lot of fascicles sliding past each other that are really stiff, but you got to have the muscle strength to be able to use it. And everyone's going to have a different stress strain curve, which is why you're your own individual snowflake. So you need to take that into account when you pick a jump strategy, right? If I'm a 2-foot jumper, I probably have a softer tendon and I need to run. Maybe I get it stiffer. I need to run faster. I can use it better, but I need a stronger muscle to also facilitate that. Those would
If
be the key.
you're a Stephen Holm type of athlete, but you want to be able to jump high off a short approach, is there anything you can do?
No, if you have Stephen Holmes tendons, you would need to have the strongest muscles. Like that's how
You'd have
stiff
to
his
essentially
tendons are.
become output monster so that you're,
Beyond output monster to be
yeah,
able to stretch it off a short
yeah.
approach.
That way you
Like you
can,
can still jump high off 3 steps, but it's like not as much as when you add 10. Like
yeah.
10 is going to be better for sure. So
Mhm.
that's what I would say. But yeah, this is a good place to stop. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully it was insightful. If you have feedback or you're a specialist in this area, like, again, if you're Gasper E Pro or Ben Moxness, or if Turo watches this, I doubt he does, leave some feedback if I misspoke or whatever. And maybe we'll clear it up in tomorrow's episode. But thank you for watching, guys.
And if you want training,
if you want training, go to THPstrength.com. I'm the head coach at THPstrength.com. I invented translating human performance in 2018, and I've coached Isaiah ever since. And now he's one of the highest jumpers in the world. And Tony's one of the highest jumpers in the world. And I coached him, and I coached Jay Clark and improved his vertical 2 inches in 2017, which was one of the best accolades I've ever done. And okay, Donovan Hawkins. All right, see you guys.